Hey, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to show you how to backtest a trading strategy using PyAlgoTrade. So if you Google for PyAlgoTrade, you'll find the website to get started. As you can see, it's a fully documented open source backtesting library. It's event driven. It supports market limit, stop limit orders. It supports a variety of data sources. So using CSV files like Yahoo Finance, Google Finance, and Quandl. It supports live Bitcoin trading using a Bitstamp. It has some built-in technical indicators, not that many of them. You'll probably want to use an external library for that, but if you want to use the indicators that are built in, it has a simple moving average, EMA, RSI, Bollinger Bands, a couple other ones. And since this strategy is simple and just based on a simple moving average, we can just use the one that comes inside of the box, and we won't have to install TALib or any of these other external libraries. It has some performance metrics like Sharpe ratio and drawdown analysis. So I'll show you how to use the analyzers later in this tutorial. Not only can you use price data feeds, you can feed in other types of data. So you'll see in the documentation, it actually shows you how to use Twitter as a feed. So you could feed in like a Twitter timeline of tweets. Maybe you want to trade Elon's Dogecoin tweets or Bitcoin tweets or Tesla tweets or something like that. Maybe you can find something there. So it can accept a Twitter feed. And yeah, it has TALib integration in case you want to use a TALib. So if we dive into the documentation here, you'll see there is a full tutorial. And also if I click table of contents, you'll see the full documentation in here. And so if you look at the tutorial, it'll show you the basic components of this library. And so the main components are strategies. So strategy is just my approach to trading. Do I want to buy based on some indicator? Do I want to buy based on a tweet? What are my conditions for buying and selling? How am I approaching my trading? A feed is just a data feed. So I'm getting my historical data from some location. So maybe I'm getting it from Yahoo Finance. Maybe I'm downloading it from a Polygon.io or IQ feed or another data source, or maybe I'm getting it from my brokerage, or maybe it's not historical data. I can probably feed in some real-time data and do some live trading as well. The third is brokers. So usually in a backtesting library, there's some type of broker class that emulates your broker. So a broker is just like TD Ameritrade might be your broker. You might use Alpaca. You might use interactive brokers. And a broker usually has a number of settings. So usually you can set an initial cash balance for a broker and you can execute trades. So maybe you want to execute a market order on your broker or a limit order or a stop limit order, whatever you want to do. This just emulates what you do when you're clicking the buttons in your brokerage account, except you're doing it with Python code in this case. And so this will determine what your fill price is and so forth. A data series. So there's basically a data type in PyAlgoTrade that you can operate on. And so whenever you feed in this data from your data feed, you'll actually get this data series object on which you can apply technicals. So there's some built-in technical indicators in this library that you can use, including your typical moving averages, RSI, momentum indicators, that sort of thing. And then you have this optimizer. So an optimizer lets you backtest with a number of different parameters. So let's say you have a moving average crossover strategy, right? That's the 50 and the 200 day, but you want to run this optimizer to test it with a bunch of different parameter values. So to see if the 49 and the 201 moving averages work better or something like that, you can run it on all these different permutations of parameters. And one cool thing about the optimizer in PyAlgoTrade is it allows you to distribute your backtesting among different computers, so different processes running on the same computer or backtesting on different computers. So if you'll remember when I did the backtrader video on opening range breakout, for instance, I wanted to test many different instruments, so like all the stocks in the QQQ, so like 100 different stocks, and I wanted to try an opening range time period of, I think I did 5 minutes, 15 minutes, and 30 minutes. And to do all those different permutations, actually, that backtest ran a significant amount of time. It wasn't like instant or anything. You might have to leave it running. So let's pretend you wanted to backtest all these different strategy combinations and all these different attributes over long periods of time. Maybe the backtest runs hours. I don't know how long it would take. depending on how complex your strategy and the number of permutations you want to test, it can take a long time. So rather than just executing those back tests one after another, if you could split it and run a bunch of different processes in parallel, then you could run multiple back tests at once and distribute that workload a bit. To get started, what we're going to do is talk about how to just get a simple data feed. We've done that on this channel a number of times, and then we're going to feed this simple data feed into a basic moving average strategy just to get going. So we're going to need a couple things. So I have a Visual Studio Code open, and you see I have a new folder called PyAlgoTrade tutorial, and in here I'll just go ahead and create a requirements.txt just to keep track of the different dependencies that we need for this project. And so I'm going to use, they use Quandl for their data source here. I'm just going to use Yahoo Finance. So I'm just going to use the Y Finance package that we've used on the channel before. And then, so that'll be one dependency. And obviously we will need PyAlgoTrade. So you can install that with pip install PyAlgoTrade. So I'll add a PyAlgoTrade right there. And I'm just going to create a new file here. I'm going to call it backtest.py. Okay. And what I'll do here is, let me run this just so I get a terminal. And so my Visual Studio Code is configured to activate my virtual environment and just get me a command line running as soon as I run a program. And so what I can do here is pip install yfinance. And I've installed this before, so it should be right there. And then I'm going to also install PyAlgoTrade, just like that. Okay. And so that is installed. And so now if I go to the tutorial here and go down, you'll see they show me how to download using Quandl. I'm going to use Y Finance. So I'm going to create another file called import_data.py. And this will just be what I use to import price data. And so to use the Y Finance package, you just import Y Finance. And then just to remind you what that looks like, I can go to Y Finance. It's a Python package here. And all I need to do is use the download function. So if you import Y Finance and you want to download some data, you can just copy that line. So I'm importing Y Finance, and I'm going to say data equals Y Finance dot download. And let's say I just want to download SPY. And since this strategy was back tested across 20 years of data, I believe, let's go back to, let's say, the year 2000. And we'll go start at January 1st, and we'll end on, I believe he ended on October 4th when we looked at the Steve Burns article. Yeah, Steve Burns 200-day crush. Yeah. And so we'll start off with this data. We can add the COVID crash afterwards just to see how the strategy responded to that. And so I type Steve Burns 200-day crush, and I'm going to click right there. And you can see he offers a bunch of courses. You're getting it for free right here, so you're welcome. So yeah, they have a bunch of backtesting courses in here. And so instead of paying $69 here, I'm giving it to you for free. Let's see. Okay, moving average crushes the 200-day moving average, blah, blah, blah. So he went through October 4th, 2019. So let's just try to reproduce what's here. So we're going to download data for this roughly 20-year period, and then I can do data to CSV, because Y Finance returns this in a data frame, I believe, and I can do to CSV, and I'm going to save it to a CSV file, and I'm going to save it to a CSV file called spy.csv. And so I should be able to just run that, and you see there's a little progress bar there, and you see I have spy.csv, and indeed we have date, open, high, low, close, adjusted close, and volume for January 3rd, 2000, all the way till 2019 at the end here. So there's our October 3rd, 2019. So that's looking pretty good. So now that I have this data, I need to create a PyAlgoTrade strategy. So you can see in order to use this, we need to do from PyAlgoTrade import strategy. So from PyAlgoTrade import strategy. And I'll just run this real quick just to make sure there's no errors and that it knows where PyAlgoTrade is. No errors, so looks good. And then it also imports from PyAlgoTrade bar feed from PyAlgoTrade.bar feed, and he imports Quandl feed, but we're not using Quandl, so we're using YFinance. And so you can see in the documentation, we have these different bar providers. You see that it has this NinjaTrader, Quandl, Google Finance, Yahoo Finance. So if I click Yahoo Finance, you'll see there's a Yahoo feed here. So from PyAlgoTrade.bar feed, we're going to import Yahoo feed, Okay, so we got that. And then now that we have that, we just need to feed in our data feed. So let's see, if we look at the Quandl feed here, you see we have feed equals Quandl.feed. Okay, so I'm going to do feed, but instead of Quandl feed, I'm going to do Yahoo feed. Okay, and I'm going to say feed.add bars from CSV. So we have a CSV file. This add bars from CSV, it accepts an instrument and a path. So our instrument, we're calling it spy. In their example, they used Oracle stock. And then we have a path to the file. So I have spy.csv. So I'm adding bars to this feed from a CSV file. And if I just print the feed like that, you see now we have an object called PyAlgoTrade bar feed, and it's just a feed object. Okay, so that's not very useful yet, but there's some methods on this feed object. So you can see we can get a data series, and there's a bunch of different methods in here. So you can browse the documentation if you want to just look at what you can do with a basic feed. So this will show different different data that's available. So you can see here they show you how to load or loop through a feed. And so let's see if we can loop through this feed. So I'm going to do for date time value in feed print. Okay. And if you do that, you see how it loops through, and we have dates, and then we get all these bar objects. But we're not going to print this feed out. What we're going to do is feed this into a strategy and let our strategy trade based on this data feed and execute trades in our broker and look at the final value of our brokerage account and see if our money went up or down and by how much, and if we can adjust that strategy to maximize the amount of money we have at the end of our execution. So let's jump back to the tutorial here, and you see what they do here is they imported strategy, and so you need to create a strategy class that extends a base strategy called strategy.backtesting strategy. Okay, so I'm going to create, before the feed, I'm going to do class, and I'm going to call this my buy and hold strategy. So you can name it whatever you want. I'm going to call it what the strategy is. We're going to end up making a number of these classes. So you can have a class called buy and hold strategy. You can create a class called moving average strategy, oversold strategy, buy the dip strategy, whatever you want to call it, whatever your strategy is, call it that so that it's easy. And then I'm doing strategy.backtesting strategy. And so I'm not going to teach object-oriented programming here. So if you're unfamiliar, a class is just a way to a template for an object, and classes have inheritance. And so if I look in here, I'm going to click in, and my Visual Studio Code is set up with the Python extension, so I can jump in and look at the code that it references. And so you can see the base backtesting strategy here. It accepts a bar feed. So when you instantiate this class, you're going to pass it in a feed of data, and then it has a bunch of different methods you can call. So you see this set use adjusted values. We're going to use that in a minute. Okay, so I'm defining a class just like that, and then you need to define an init function or a constructor function. And so what that does is when you initialize this class, you create a new object, and you're going to pass it in some initial data. So I'm going to do self and then feed and an instrument. Okay, and then yeah, so we can copy this to save some typing. Okay, so I'm going to do this, and we'll adjust it as needed. Okay, so I have a self, feed, and an instrument. Our strategy is called buy and hold strategy, and so this is calling the superclass, so the class that this inherits from. And then we can say self.instrument equals instrument, and so our object is going to have a reference to the instrument that we pass in. And then we have this function called on bars, and what that's going to do is each time we read through this feed, there's going to be a new bar of data, and we need to tell it what to do when it gets to the next bar. Okay, and this is similar to in Backtrader, we had a method called next, and it's just on the next bar do this, on the next bar do that, and you can compare the current bar to the previous bar, so you can look at the current bar, look at the last 14 bars or 200 bars to do the moving average and so forth to execute your strategy. Okay, and I'm just going to do self.instrument. I'm not going to use all these underscores they use there. Okay, and so all this is doing now is each time there's a new bar, I'm going to get the bar and I'm going to log that bar to the console. So bar.getClose will get the closing price of that bar, and I'm going to use this self.info function, and that's just going to print to the screen. I could have just used print, but this self.info is a utility function they have, and what that does is it logs it with a timestamp too. So we'll automatically get the timestamp of the current bar without having to like format the timestamp. Okay. Okay, so I have the strategy class set up here. I have the feed set up here. And so now what I need to do is instantiate my strategy. So I'm going to do strategy equals buy and hold strategy. And I need to pass it in these two parameters, my feed and my instrument. So I have my feed, and then my instrument is just called spy. Okay, and then I need to run my strategy. So you see they have a strategy run here. So I'm going to do strategy.run. And let's run that and see what happens. Okay, and look at that. You see we're already making progress. I know it hasn't done much yet, but we're feeding in some historical data for the S&P 500 for SPY, the ETF. And you see we print out each date and time. And since this is just the closing price, you know, we don't have this is just like midnight. And then we're just logging the info and we're logging the closing price. So you can see it all the way back to the year 2000. Through October of 2019. So we got some data, we have a data feed, we're instantiating a strategy class that we extended, and we're running it and printing out the bars in our data feed, but we're not really executing any trades yet. We're just aware of what the data is. Okay, so I'm going to set a couple of parameters here. So you'll notice there's this use adjusted values. So we're going to use that. So at the beginning, when we instantiate this, I'm going to say self.use set use adjusted values to true, because we want to use the adjusted close, right? And so the adjusted close, what that does is adjust for dividends and splits. So we're going to use the adjusted close, not the close here. And so in PyAlgoTrade, you just run this self.setUseAdjusted values here, okay? And so we're going to use the adjusted values, and then also I'm going to create another instance variable, so self.position. So this is the state of my strategy, and at the beginning I'm going to set my position to none. So I have this variable called position, and I'm setting it to none because I don't own any stock yet. And after I execute a trade, I'm going to store my position inside of this variable. Okay, so when am I going to execute a trade? If I was doing some type of indicator-based strategy, I would wait till 20 bars or 100 bars or whatever. But since my first example here for simplicity is a buy and hold strategy, what I'm going to say is I'm going all in on the very first bar. Okay, and so how do I know when it's the first bar? Well, since I'm executing this trade on the very first bar, I'm just going to execute a trade if I'm not in a position yet. Okay, so new bar comes in, we log it. New bar comes in, we log it. So what I'm going to do here is say if self.position is none, which it is at the beginning, then I'm going to execute an order. Okay, so I'm going to buy SPY, and I want to use all of my money. So if self.position is none, we'll just set close equal to bar.getClose there. So we have the closing price. And then what we want to do is do self.position. So we're not in position, but we're going to enter a position. So what I can do is use this enter long function. So there's a function called enter long here. You give it an instrument, a quantity, and a quantity of shares. Okay. So I'm going to do self.enter long. And I need to give it an instrument. Since I set self instrument to the instrument that came in, I can do self.instrument, and then I need to give it a quantity. So if I look at the function signature here, I have an instrument, and then I have a quantity. Okay, so my quantity how many shares do I want to buy? Well, I said I want to use all my money. And so let's see how much money I even have. So I'm going to comment this line out. Okay. And so when I instantiate this, let's see how we access our money. Okay. So what you can do here is the strategy actually gives you a way to reference the broker. So I can do strategy.getBroker. And the way you know that all this stuff is there, you go to strategy in the documentation, and you can read through it, right? So one thing I have noticed about PyAlgoTrade is that Backtrader does have a lot more tutorials and examples out there in their documentation. This has API documentation, so you can look at the code documentation, but not a lot of people have written tutorials on this yet. So this tutorial here that's included is pretty good, but yeah, not a lot of third-party tutorials out there. In fact, after I record this might be the best tutorial out there because there's not that many. Strategy. So from our strategy class, we can get the feed, we can get the broker, and then you can see there's these market and limit order functions and so forth. Okay, so I'm going to get a reference to the broker, right? So I'm going to say broker equals self.getBroker, and then we have a reference to the broker. And then to get the amount of cash in my brokerage account, I can do cash equals broker.getCash, right? So you see I can get a broker from the strategy, but if I go back and I look at the broker classes, right, you can see it has a get cash function right here. So I can call get cash to get the amount of cash in my brokerage account. And let's print how much cash I have on each bar. All right, just so you see it. And it looks like the initial amount of cash they give you is $1 million. You can configure all this stuff with different settings. So you can set your brokerage to $10,000 if you want to test this. With $10,000, it looks like the default is $1 million. And so you can access a variety of information about the broker. And so your broker might have a number of shares in it, number of positions, active orders. Yeah, so there's a bunch of details about your brokerage, and you can create orders and so forth. Okay, so we have a certain amount of cash, right? And we want to enter long and store our position inside of self.position. So I'm going to do self.enter long. I'm using the instrument, and then I need to give it a quantity. And so if I have $1 million, how many shares can I buy? Well, obviously the quantity we can just set equal to the amount of cash we have divided by the close, right? So we have a number of cash divided by the price of it. That'll give us a quantity, and I'll pass this quantity variable in right here, and let's run that. Okay, nothing went wrong, so that's good so far. So we entered long. So let's see what happened. So we enter long, and then we store the position in here. So then we'll have a position, and then the next bar go around self.position will not be none, and we won't execute another trade. So then after my strategy is run, if I want to see the results, I can do strategy.getBroker. And let's see how much cash I have now, or how much equity, since I didn't sell. So I'm going to do get equity, and I'll store that in a portfolio value variable. And then I'll just print the portfolio value. So I'll print portfolio value. Okay. If I do that after I run through, you'll see that I have a $2.28 million, which doesn't quite match what I expected. And one thing I just realized is on this bar.getClose, what I want is the adjusted close right here, okay? Because that doesn't quite match, right? This says we should have got a 210% return, right? 210% return, which means we would have about $3.1 million, not $2.28 million. So if I run this again using the adjusted close, you'll see that I finished with 2.9 million in equity value, which still isn't quite a 3.1. So we want to get it a little bit closer because it still doesn't quite match. So let's go a little bit further with this and try to get it a little bit closer to what we're expecting here, and think of anything that we might have left out. So I called get equity. But so that'll get me the amount that my SPY shares are worth, but I still might have a little bit of cash left over. So what I want to do is do my portfolio value is strategy dot get broker dot get equity, and then I want to add my cash. So there might be a little bit of remaining cash. So let's see what that number is. If I add the little bit of extra cash that didn't quite buy a whole share, you see that gets me up to about $2.916 million. So that's still not quite, we still expect a little bit more than that. So what accounts for this discrepancy? So we still don't know, like, how much did we actually buy these SPY shares for? How do we know where this broker actually filled our trade? And so there's another function in here called on enter OK. So if I look at my strategy class here, if you look, there's one called on enter OK. Get notified when the order submitted to enter a position was filled. Okay, so what we want to do is override that function. So what I can do is define some code that runs after our order was filled, and it gets a reference to our position. Okay, so I can do on enter OK, and then I'll do self and position. So it gets a reference to the position, and then our position object we can get information about the order here. Okay, so what I'll do here is do self.info. So when it's filled, we're just going to log the execution info. So I'm going to do an F string here, and I'm going to type position.get entry order, and then our order will have some execution info. So you can call any of these methods. So you can say info, get execution info will return information about our order. And there's other ones like get the filled price is accepted and different statuses, right? So if we want to see if the order was partially filled, you know, if we're testing more of that stuff. So get execution info, okay? And so now let's see if we log when the order is filled. And if I scroll back, let's not print every bar just so I don't have so much info here. So I'm going to delete this self.info there. If I do that, you see we have a log message for January 4th at a price of $96.54, and we got 10,222 shares. And so you'll notice, let's look at our data feed. We started at January 3rd, right? We got a bar of data for January 3rd, and then we calculated the quantity we wanted to buy. And so our adjusted close on January 3rd was 97.82 here, right? So 97.82, so we got our 1 million, and then we divide by 97.82, and that gets us our 10,222 shares. So we sent 10,222 shares that we wanted to buy on this order for the instrument. Now, did we get this price of 96.54? You'll notice when I logged the entry, when the order was filled, it actually used January 4th, right? Which is the second day. And so technically we waited until the market closed, until that bar was closed for the day, right? And so we didn't enter the order yet. And so not Ken Burns, that's the documentary maker, right? This strategy assumes, if you read down here, all returns are total return, which includes dividends and distributions, and assumes the entry and exit is executed at the closing price. So if we waited for the closing price, we didn't necessarily get the closing price. So this is actually executing, buying 10,222 shares at a slightly different price. So it looks like they gave us a fill price. The brokerage determined that our fill price was 96.54. And so if we multiply 10,222 times 96.54, that we actually only deployed 986,000 of our dollars. So we had some cash left there. Okay, so that was our actual number. If we were to get the close price of 97.82, then you see that's closer to our actual $1 million there. Okay, so we bought 10,222 shares there. Yeah, and so that's where our order get filled. So that's one difference between our back test and the strategy that's described here is we actually didn't get the closing price for the first day. We we execute a trade on the second day. And so, yeah, that's pretty good. I think we learned a lot already. This video has covered quite a bit already, so probably going to end it here. But look, we created a new strategy class using PyAlgoTrade. We imported some data using Yahoo Finance. We fed that data, so we created this feed object, got the CSV file, fed it into our strategy, and we learned how to execute trades and read through a feed, a bar by bar, and execute a trade and solve what our ending portfolio value was. So we were able to use our broker to enter a long position. We're able to see when our trade got executed and record our final result of our equity and cash. So yeah, that's it for this video. Stay tuned for the next video where we will try to beat the S&P 500 by using a technical indicator. So thanks a lot for watching. Stay tuned for the next video. Thanks.